Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another series of Foundry virtual events. My name is Joyce, your marketing host for today. I'm really excited to be here to talk about Love, Death, and Robots on the Life Hutch episode specifically. And I'm super honored to have Blur Studio on today's event. We have Nitant, Karnik, Compositing Supervisor, and Wes Cronk, Compositing Lead, both artists playing an incredible big role in creating the Life Hutch episode. So thank you so much for joining today. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure. And also, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to work indirectly for Michael B. Jordan. It's probably the highlight of my life. I wish he was part of the webinar, but maybe next time. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I'm equally excited to be here with two of my colleagues from the Nuke team, Anna Samuel and Anais Torreblanca, Associate Product Managers here at Foundry. So I'm sure you want to get to the actual interesting part, so I will whiz through my part very quickly. We have some really great content available on our website. The recent ones we have at the moment is a project that we've done recently, a collaboration that we're doing on near real-time virtual production. So it's a story on that. The second one is a feature on Marvel's What If series. And the third one is a really cool story on creating a pixel art world with Nuke Indie. And for more information and industry trends, make sure you follow us on social media as well. So it's been a really long time since we've done an actual real life event after COVID-19. So we're super excited to be going to an actual live event again. We're going to be at FMX next week in Stuttgart, Germany. If you are going to be there, join us. Join us on Tuesday, May 3rd. We will be in room Mannheim. We will have sessions all day with MPC, Mikros Animation, Electric Theater Collective, Victor Perez, Hugh Guerra. If you're there, make sure to come say hi. Would love to see you, connect with you again. And yeah, hopefully see you in Germany. We also have some great virtual events coming up as well, if you want to stay online. On April 28th, we've got a really cool webinar with Trickster on Shang-Chi and the Legend of Ten Rings with Katana. And on May 19th, we have a deep dive on Nuke Studio as well. So you can register directly via our website. And if you have any questions, any concerns, or you'd like to participate in our virtual event series, just send us an email on virtual.events@foundry.com. So as I'm sure you know, Nuke 13.2 is finally out, helping accelerate creativity with upgraded workflows and new tech, and removing pipeline frictions. So if you haven't had a chance to have a look at the spec and the features, make sure to do so. Everything's available on our website, but I will share a link again that will take you there directly. And as promised, short and sweet, that's it from me. Thank you again for joining, and I will hand over to my colleague, Anna.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm super excited to be here with you all and with Wes and Nitant today. So I think I'm just going to jump right in. Before we go and have a kind of deep dive into the more technical aspects, can you talk us through the vision, your vision of Love, Death and Robots and the Life Hutch episode, and how did this whole piece come about? It's quite unique.
For sure, yeah. I can't, to be honest, it's not fair for me to say it's my vision. It's a shared vision for sure, but Love, Death, and Robots is a Netflix series created by Tim Miller and David Fincher. And together they curated all of the short stories that you see in the series. And Life Hutch is just one of those short stories. It was based on a short by Harlan Ellison. And our director, Alex Beatty, it's more his vision than anyone else's, I would say, for this particular episode. He worked with our art director Alexi, as well as our VFX supervisor Dan Akers, and together they were able to craft like this wonderful story we have here. I would say like a lot of the inspiration came from Alex's desire to keep the story really grounded in what's familiar to us as people. We referenced a lot of images of Vasquez Rock in California, as well as our own moon for the landscape of the planetoid that this interstellar pilot crashes onto, as well as all the dials and the cockpit. All those the aesthetics of that kind of are very familiar to us. If you're for those of us out there who are fighter pilots, you probably know that you have to switch the button up to fire the AMRAAM missiles. Yeah, So you can do that, and it's very tactile in that way, I think, as well as like the robot vision, which was kind of we referenced a lot of night vision and lidar and things like that. But the short itself, I would say, I think it's to give you a little bit about it. It's a story about an interstellar pilot who's fighting an alien mothership, and his ship is shot down, and he crashes into this planetoid, and he's forced to kind of find refuge in what's known as a life hutch, and it's kind of like this lifeboat where they have a lot of medical supplies as well as communications and setups that you can actually send out a distress beacon and things like that. And so it's really a story of survival, I would say.
Welcome to our presentation of Life Hutch Deconstructed. Today we'll be sharing and breaking down the work our team did on Life Hutch, one of the episodes from Netflix's series Love, Death, and Robots. My name is Nitant Karnik. I'm the Compositing Supervisor at Blur, and I'm here today with Wes Cronk, who is the comp lead on the project. Together we worked to tell this story through lighting and compositing and keep the audience engaged with the protagonist at all times.
So today we're going to show you how we use Nuke to both tell the story and achieve the look, everything from the big setups to some small tricks that we learned along the way. The story in Life Hutch is that our main character crashes on an alien planet and ends up having to hole up in this outpost, this one small room. And turns out, though, that the maintenance robot has a malfunction and it sees him as a threat and it attacks him. So we're in a small room. It's dark. Our main character, one of our main characters, is a robot with no facial expressions, no face. So how do we tell the story, convey the robot's intentions, and build suspense? Well, a lot of this was done in Nuke. So we're here today to run through 2 shots and run through the Nuke script and show you some of the things we did.
So it's hard to mention the production of this show and not talk about the COVID impact on it. The onset team was capturing all this footage and data the day before LA went into lockdown, and it was critical for them to be able to do all of this and get us going. You could see from this, what's on my screen right now is a before and after. This is the original plate, and you can see that Michael B. Jordan is on set there with an eye line that's representing the robot with a light mounted to an arm here, and all we really kept is Michael B. Jordan's head in this scene. And for this section of the episode, we had about 136 shots, 4 compers in 2 months. So it was really important that we built a template that was solid and got us 75% of the way there. The data that we had on set was really critical too. We had everything camera tracked and match moved, so that all our depth of field was relatively correct. So if you had focus on Michael B. Jordan, the focus on the robot would be relatively out or in. So that was having those foundations was critical. So by appearances, this script looks pretty straightforward. You have your background up here. You have your robot elements here. This is our CG Terrence, our plate Terrence, and then our robot beam setup, and a little bit of lens effects at the bottom, right before our right nodes. So with that, I'll dive into what we're here to talk about, which is how we did this robot. So the robot comes in from the scene assembly department looking like that. We do some AOV corrections and get it to be
a bit more cohesive in the scene with great layers and things like that. One of the most important things that we had to figure out was how much of the look of the lens was going to be done by the scene assembly and lighting departments, and how much was going to be done in comp. So the scene assemblers had rendered for us the source light here, and then they rendered the influence of the light, and we were combining that in comp to kind of get like this LED look inside the housing of the robot's head. And if you think of the robot's head like a camera, there's multiple lens elements within it. And so that's kind of what we tried to emulate in comp, using ST maps that were connected to the UV channels we're getting from scene assembly. We're able to map on some lens dirt and also create like the phenomenon of a light hitting the inside of the lens element here. That's kind of what we have here, with a little bit of refraction going on. It's creating like a textured glass look. And we also use the V-Ray sampler info to create an extra refraction to the lens itself. All that gets merged over to the robot and eventually onto the background. Another thing to point out about the script is the way the atmosphere is being merged on. It's being merged on the same way on every element. And it comes in at the top here. But we also have a beam atmospheric element. And this element is rendered from our scene assembly team. And it was a bit softer and noisier than we had hoped. And what our director was looking for was more of a laser beam-like look. So we did end up using this element, but it was more supplemental, and it wasn't the hero part of the beam. And I'll go into the hero part of the beam in a second. We created this denoise node to get rid of a lot of the noise, and Wes is going to talk a little bit about the thought process behind that.
Well, this one, I think it was Nuke 11 that introduced the motion vector input to the denoise node, which I think this was the show that I really discovered how helpful that could be, especially for the atmosphere passes, because it's not super easy to denoise atmosphere passes when you don't have a hard surface to track and use the normals and positioning stuff against. So anyway, this is using the denoise node with the vector input. Sometimes we're blending up to 6 frames across things, but I built a wrapper for this that kind of had some presets that worked really well for atmosphere and detailed renders, and we relied on it more than I thought we originally thought we would, but it was extremely helpful for stuff like this, where we have these small lights kind of projecting through atmosphere.
They call him Dr. Wes. He builds all kinds of tools like that for us, and we love him for it. So yeah, there's that, and then there's also the hero beam element, as I mentioned before, which comes in here, and the team had to create a clever little setup to figure this out. It's all being done through God rays, which is, I think it's like one of my favorite nodes in Nuke. But yeah, it's leveraging the alembic caches from animation. So we have an LED for the center, and then we have LEDs for the perimeter, and these represent the different scanning modes of this robot. And to get the vector correct, so obviously you can't just have this and do God rays and expect to get the right result. You actually need to get the correct positional data for this vector to align to the orientation of the robot's helmet. So we created a tool called Read Axis Cache. What this tool does is it scans your scene context and looks for alembic caches that are produced by our RTDs in animation, and basically creates an axis within it. It turns on and off this read from file button to bring in the file and uncheck it. We found that if you leave it checked, it will make your Nuke script inoperable. So yeah, that's part of the reason why we built this little node here, and it's been pretty critical for us. So it's being attached to the reconcile 3D nodes, as well as driving this transform for a cone that we're building here. I'm going to clear that really fast. So this cone, once we pipe in the the transform geo to the read axis cache, it aligns the vector of the robot's head. And that's really critical for helping us figure out and sketch essentially where our deep is and what it should hold out. It's a really good way to work that we found to give us a proxy for elements that we're either generating in comp or that can't possibly have depth to them, or that it's really expensive to render depth for. So in this case, we have this beam that it's, you know, calculating depth for that is not super easy. So that's mainly what we're using the cone for. We're leveraging the depth data from our scanline render node to give it a proper depth of field. And on top of that, we're just adding a little bit of lens particulates and atmosphere. We opted to go for a practical element for the lens particulates in this case because we just felt like the particle node might have slowed us down a bit too much, and it wasn't a superhero element. It was just a supplemental thing that really helped sell the idea of like a laser beam cutting through, you know, all these little floating bits of dust in the air. And then we have a section of the script dedicated to the flicker and the timing of the robot's eyes.
The robot's eye has a couple different modes, and which mode he is in is very important in telling the story. There's 3 different modes. There's kind of the idle mode, which is just one beam. There's the slightly more aware alert mode, scanning, 5 beams, solid. And then there's attack mode where the 5 beams are flashing. And they had a light on set that was actually casting this green flickering light. So we were somewhat beholden to what was done on set when it comes to continuity and timing. And we had some plate shots that had the timing already baked in from set. We had a couple full CG shots, and we needed to use those as a transition of, you know, between the different modes to line up with our plates and use it to build suspense. You know, is the robot aware of his presence? Does it see him? Because if you hold really still, the robot can't see you. And so we really wanted to use that to kind of play into this thing of when he's holding still, is the robot panning across his face? Is he aware that he's there or not? So we built this and had a master edit that kind of, we adjusted the timing across everything, bring it in, and created a big spreadsheet of what frame is it changing mode, stuff like that. You bring it into the comps here, and then the comper could, you know, individually adjust the timing using a couple of the controls that Nitant's going to run us through here.
Yeah, these controls really helped you to just kind of switch back and forth, as Wes was saying, so that you didn't need to create a template for this is the attack mode or this is the idle mode. You could just literally like slide this back and forth and you know, hit the note as needed. And there's a nice little flicker button to turn on the flicker. So all that was really helpful to have in the comp, just to remain flexible as the edit changed and as the timings changed. You know, we all of our interactive lighting was rendered from scene assembly full on, so that, you know, we could control the frequency of it in comp. And as Wes mentioned, you know, we were timing it all to the plate, and the plate, we were able to measure the frequency of the flicker so that we maintained that same flicker in the comp. To finish off, we added a bit of glow, and then the lens optical flares lens elements to really sell that, you know, this is a laser beam that's cutting through the air, and yeah, just to kind of get that optical quality to everything. We like to keep all the optical elements of the shot at the bottom of the script, so it can be quickly dialed. Add a little bit of lens distortion, and Bob's your uncle. And so what was really cool about this is that our goal was to get it towards this concept, and I feel like we did a great job of just getting it to match the essence of that concept, and you know, keep this this robot feeling menacing and threatening. So with that, I'm gonna switch gears, and Wes is gonna take over and talk about our next shot.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about a shot from the space battle sequence. So this is a flashback scene that kind of precipitates him landing on the alien planet. And there's a lot going on in this shot, kind of unlike the other shot that we covered, which was all about volume, templating, getting through everything, kind of in a procedural way as possible. A shot like this kind of is a one-off here. There's a lot going on, and while we can templatize certain parts of it, this is just bringing a lot of different elements together. This one is when he fires the missiles. They hit the alien ship shooting at him. It knocks off a chunk that hits his spacecraft, and this is, again, what causes him to crash land on the alien planet. So a lot of the stuff, like the crack on the window, a lot of the glass treatment, even the interior core of the alien mothership, it's all being done in Nuke. So we're going to cover that here in a second. So big comp script, but we'll start at the place. It's good to start any comp, which is far background. So this is a matte painting that was done by one of our matte painting artists, and we're relying heavily on live groups for this. So every time the matte painter delivered a new matte painting, we package it up into a live group, publish it, and that way every compositor on the sequence, it was all versioned. We have these set up through our versioning system, and it would just alert you that there's a new matte painting version. You could update it, and really easy to kind of keep everyone in sync that way. It just has, we made a camera input, so you can always plug it into your shot camera, and very straightforward to roll out matte paintings to new people. So let's talk about the alien ships for a moment. They're kind of set up like miniature Dyson spheres, where it's this swarm around these rotating rings, kind of around this core energy fusion source. We started out with scene assembly rendering some stuff for us, straight out of V-Ray. Weren't really getting the look that we were going for. So what we ended up doing is we ended up turning to this plugin called Point Render. And what it does, it's a brilliantly set up plugin. It just produces a lot of individual points which can be rendered subpixel precision through this Blink script here. And they're simply stored as basically an array of points with their associated world positions. And we rely on a couple of these different ones to achieve this kind of sun flare-like look. And it's Blink script, GPU accelerated, really fast, really quick to iterate on. And it gives us these really cool looks. And I'm using the existing deep from the renders. And same thing here, kind of doing a sketch of the rough geometry in deep and the rough ranges, and using that as a holdout instead, so we get this look. And that gives us our alien ship. So we're getting explosions from effects that we're integrating here. Got our asteroids. And the way that we're handling holdouts in most of our scripts here at Blur is running kind of a simultaneous flat and deep tree, using the deep tree to hold out each item as we merge it in, and kind of continuously run these. The other benefit of doing it this way is that we can also assign all of our mattes for each object to the deep stream, which means at the very bottom, we can simply shuffle out those matte layers and include them as DI mattes without having to do all of the crazy, stenciling and merging and transforming into main tree. So it's proven to be helpful for doing that. In addition to always having access, wherever you are in the script, if I want to add in some atmosphere down here, I can just reach over into this deep tree, grab a deep holdout and always have something that's always going to be able to be put into the comp at any point in layering. If I can take part of this script, cut it, paste it, move it up here, and it's still going to produce the same look because all the holdouts are handled back to front. Another thing that we're doing in comp that maybe you wouldn't expect is the atmosphere around the enemy ship. These things are huge. The scene is set up in a way where a lot of the measurements are accurate, which means if you start trying to put in some stock footage on cards, if you start trying to render it using VBGs, it's really hard to get that to work. So we set up something using a lot of P noises, a bunch of different layers of P noises, and animate that over time, and it actually produces one of the most stable atmosphere setups that we were able to put together for this this sequence, and we ended up using it for the final thing. Have a lot of effects coming in with all of those beams that are shooting at the ship. And then we have pretty much a completed background right here. So then we move on to Terrence and the ship. Glass is always an interesting thing to do in comp, because if you render baked in refractions, you have very little control over what's behind that refraction. You have to pass all of your mats, all of your AOVs through. Also, you start doubling up on things. If I want to grade specular or reflection, am I grading the specular and reflection of what's behind the glass, or am I grading the specular and reflection of the glass itself? So I'm a fan of doing glass in comp, rendering out reflection passes and whatnot, obviously as a render, but doing a lot of the smudges treatments, diffuse treatments, and the actual refraction vector distortion in comp, because it just gives you the most flexibility. So how are we doing this glass? Well, we have the ship itself. Was it here? Turn off the so we have the ship itself, and then we have this separate glass pass. We have a couple glass utility passes, which includes a lot of the reflection. And then we had modeling run us out this reference for the UV layout of the glass. And using this, we were able to take a couple of these smudges and position them on top of, so this, position these guys on top of that reference. And then using the STMap node and a UV channel rendered for the glass utility, map these onto the windows. So we have a lot of, we had a lot of things of moving around. If the sun's over here, you're going to get this flare. We shot these plates on set of, how light's going to react through a pane of glass, and we're retiming and mapping that to line it up with where the sun is on the glass. And then, of course, you have the big crack hit. So you have a couple of these glass cracks that, again, we're timing out, positioning, and mapping and onto the glass using the UV thing. I find that if I can either, track this, which ended up being the best way to do it for the motion blur, or using a vector pass to apply some motion blur after it's being mapped. And that is going to give us our best glass result. We have, and then of course we have Terrence with his helmet and visor. So we have a pass of him without the visor on. Do all of the lighting on his face. Use all the facial mats to do the the precise eye correction, any adjustment we want to do here, and then we have the visor glass as a separate pass with an accurate alpha. This is one thing I found, is that having an accurate alpha where the see-through things are transparent and not, because a lot of times if you take that geo and you just render it as a reflective object, it comes in with a pure white alpha. And you're like, oh, well, glass, you can just plus it on top and get the reflections. Not so much. You do have, as you can see here, some pretty good detail. And when you're merging that on top of something else, you want to extract that kind of detail, what's see-through and what's not. So we are merging this on top. And also what's important is using I'm using the normals right now to apply distortion to the background. But there's a couple different ways to do it. You can either use the normals and rotate them to face camera and then use the fall off to do some glass distortion. Or there's a way to render out distortion vectors out of V-Ray into this channel. At least for us, it's V-Ray sampler info, and we can use that to get an accurate distortion in the background. Now, accurate looks good and tells the story. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it isn't. So, in this case, we diverged a little bit from what the perfect distortion vectors would be and went with something that just looks good. So all of that's brought together, and lots and lots and lots of lens flares. All of these are driven through this same read access cache that Nitant was talking about on his shot, where we're reading directly from the animation caches. So when they publish new animation, we can simply go and update this and have all of the data local in the script in an access node where we can pull in the transform data we need. So those are plugged into lights. We get a lot of lens flares happening here. So once we hit this point, it's time to put on all of the optical effects. And we developed this system here at Blur that I call Lens Kit. And when we start a show, even a full CG show, we pick a set of lenses that we want to use for that show. And it's collaboration between the comp department and the layout department in terms of, okay, if I'm going to shoot this show on, let's say, airy master anamorphics, this is the set of focal lengths that I have available to use. And we sample the chromatic aberration, the vignetting, the way the bokeh looks, a lot of the characteristics of the lens, and we build it into this lens kit node. So we have the lens kit depth of field node, we have halation, and we have the lens distortion and this kind of stuff. And this is all linked back. This is all linked back to the camera. So, as we get the focal length, it'll adjust the lens distortion to match. And this allows us to add all of the necessary optical effects on top of this and get a really cohesive looking shot.
Firing.
So that sums up our approach on 2 shots on Life Hutch, kind of 2 separate approaches. One is, getting through a lot of shots, template, procedural, our primary set for our story. The other one is one of our more complex one-off shots where we really have to do a lot of stuff in Nuke and kind of work out a method of tag teaming what we're doing in comp, what we're doing in lighting, and making optimal use of our farm and resources. So thank you for joining us, and I think we're going to be around to answer a couple questions that you have.
That was a great presentation. For anyone that just joined, we have the questions tab, which is next to the chat section. So you can just go there and ask any questions for the team. Many of those questions have already been answered, but we can answer some of them live. I will just go by those that have more votes. This one, by example, what exactly is deep compositing and how does it differ from regular compositing, I guess?
I'm a big fan of deep compositing, but if you take an image and you have an XY kind of grid of pixels in that image, you can also assign a depth to each pixel. So like obviously the pixel that's on my eye is closer to you than the pixel that's back here on the blinds. And so you can do a lot with that depth information, like defocusing or adding fog behind me or whatever else. But it's still just a single sample from that pixel. So what deep compositing actually is it can store multiple pixels per XY coordinate, I guess I would say. So for example, if you have a window or you have a see-through glass, like if I have this glass sitting right here and I want to put something behind it, well, I mean, like normally with a single image that would be practically impossible. You'd have to extract the, all the different parts of the glass and then layer it back on top of what you put on. But deep compositing, this could theoretically have 3 samples, one for the foreground glass. This is a little better if it was like colored, but one for the foreground glass, one for the background glass here, and then one for the blinds behind you. I mean, and If you get fog, you could be talking about thousands of samples. It doesn't have to just be 2 or 3. But it's really cool because you're actually storing almost a 3-dimensional pixel representation of the image. So I think at its core, that's what it comes down to, which is multiple samples per XY pixel, like as it goes back. You can store any number of pixels stacked behind that. And so then once you have that, you can do all sorts of things in terms of, you can render everything without holdouts baked in because you know it's information in space. So what we do in our scripts is you use the deep and you use the render and you create a mask of where that render actually shows up and then put that in there. And then that means if I change the animation for one aspect of it, or for one character in the scene, I don't need to re-render all characters in the scene, or I can take some atmosphere, or especially what we do is explosions. We render them full deep out of Mantra and, explosions, smoke, stuff like that. And you can just throw that in the scene, and if a character's animation changes, we just swap them out. We don't have to re-render the whole thing. I love it. It's amazing. Those things can get heavy. I think the biggest I ever saw was up to about 1 terabyte per frame. So
yeah, you kind of have to be wary and wise about how you use deep, right? It's like
you can't just turn the switches on for every shot on the show. You have to actually make your picks.
Yeah, I think standard workflow for us is like Wes said, we use deep shadows, which are just the alpha deep information. So our beauty renders are rendered RGBA, and we just do copying the holdout alpha, and you kind of have your holdout there.
Noah is asking, how much time did you have to prepare the templates, tools, and pipeline before diving into full shot production?
Okay, sure. Well, that's always kind of a scheduling decision beforehand in terms of like, we need more time to prepare or more time working on shots. And sometimes you don't have enough preparation time as you want, and sometimes you have a lot of preparation time because maybe the animation gets delayed or the render farm stuffed up, so you don't have all your renders to start working with. So you kind of have to be flexible on your feet to be like, okay, well now I want to make as much of this procedural as possible, as much of this templatized as possible, so that when the renders do start coming through, we can just hit the ground running and be as fast as possible. This one, I would say we generally, Nitant, you might know more about the scheduling than I do, but I would say, it's on the orders of weeks, 3 weeks to 4 weeks to kind of get a show set up, work with a template. We work with the effects people and the scene assemblers and everyone, and of course the concept artist too. And it's a very back and forth process. You have to be really communicative and be like, okay, I need this split into these elements. I need these render passes. Deep for this, not for this, because this is always going to be in the front of screen. And so that's kind of how we build these templates over the course of generally a month, roughly.
Yeah, I'd say that's about right for this show. It seemed to evolve quite a bit, and I think most productions, if the look is still evolving after a certain point, then you have to be a little flexible with the template. And we have some really great tools that have been built to basically create your shots from the latest template and kind of get up and go and get you to the latest look, which will get you 85% of the way to finaling the shot. So kind of a bit of planning and being nimble enough to adjust the workflow as needed.
Sounds like templating really helped you out here. And you were saying you had 4 compas and then over 130 shots and then only 2 months to do it in. So is that just from the comp starts and then 2 months? So that's quite a quick turnaround, right?
Yeah, it is just the comp time, but there's always stuff going on in the background, new animations, new cameras, character changes, stuff like that. And then we're also feeding information, back to other departments that are kind of changing do things. And actually, Noah asked a question about the new tools, and some of the nodes are colored green instead of their default colors. That is part of our pipeline system in terms of, you subscribe to renders that are in the database, and then you mark them as approved or unapproved. And whenever we open a shot, you kind of have a list of like, okay, here's the elements you're using, here's the new ones, here's what you want to update. These are the ones that are currently rendering, these are the frames that are done. So you can always grab stuff that's live on the farm and at least work with the frame or something from it. So that's very, very helpful when you start working with volumes of shots like that.
Maybe do this one from Julian. Could you please explain how using the UV map allows the glass elements to track to the CG and stick in place? Does it hold position data?
Yeah, so normally any 3D object has, a UV texture map on it. So if I have just an image that's a texture and I apply it to that 3D object, how does it map on there? Especially like if you think about how a map unwraps from a globe, either you stretch it up here or you break it out into, I forget what the projection is called, where you get kind of these lobes at the top and bottom. But, there's a bunch of different ways to map a texture onto an object. And so what we do is they just render that information, which goes from 0 to 1. 0 to 1 in X / the red channel, 0 to 1 in Y / the green channel. And they just render that as an extra pass for us. And then Nuke has a node called STMap, where you just plug in that 0 to 1 UV map data, and you plug in the texture that you want to project, and it'll just render it in the position on tracked onto the object. It is sort of magical, but of course this requires you have to know what the original texture is so that you can position things properly on it, so that when it wraps onto the 3D object, it goes into the right position. So it's not just a working blind. So yeah, what we ask our scene assemblers / lighters to render out the UV map for us, but we also go to environment modeling or character modeling, whatever, and ask them for the map so that we know where to position stuff.
Are there any things that could have been better in CG elements or software or tools?
Sorry.
I was going to say the answer is always yes. You're always striving to. I would love to have 10 years to work on every project that I'm working on, but it's always due dates that are that are limiting your thing. Certainly, but the thing is, we love our pipeline department, very responsive, and we're constantly making changes. So a lot of the issues that came up with the tools, with the pipeline, with software, we're actively, adjusting as we go on through the project. And, again, same, even with the templates and tools and stuff like that, you're just constantly updating them and changing them.
Yeah, looking at that second shot specifically, it looked like a super heavy script. And I was wondering if did you have to pre-comp loads of it out, or did you just have a beast of a machine to do it all? How did that happen?
I did get a beast of a machine, luckily. But still, occasionally you do want to pre-comp things. I tend to pre-comp not to save render time, but if it's something like, if I'm only working on the ship, I'll always pre-comp everything before that. And then if I want to move down or up the node tree, rather than making a new pre-comp, I usually just extract that and then paste it further down the node tree and then re-render it. So it's more about keeping things able to be working on live rather than things taking too long on the farm. Honestly, the renders, there's very few shots where it just takes way too long to render that you have to pre-comp it to avoid just like 20-minute a frame render times. Most of the time, what I find that I run into is certain nodes, certain plugins are not multi-threaded. So everything above that then also becomes not multi-threaded. And then that slows everything way down. So there's certain instances where even if it's not doing a ton of work, you want to pre-comp right there so that you get the full benefits of multi-threading. And then that one node is only reading data, and it's a heck of a lot faster. So especially the machine we have at work is 64 core. So you get a nice benefit out of multi-threading in that case.
Yeah, and the tool you built, LensKit to Focus, is one of those instances where you might want to pre-comp right before that, right? Just to take advantage of the GPUs there.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing is, you are limited by GPU RAM, and the GPU nodes are lightning fast. But if you add up too many of them together, then there goes your GPU, your VRAM. So that's another instance where it's good to pre-comp stuff.
You're presenting from Linux. However, your 3D work is done in 3ds Max, which will be on Windows. Is Blur split into different OSs per department? If so, why?
I could do this one. Yes, it is split into 2 different OSs. animation, like you keenly observed, or you noticed that our OS is Linux in comp, and that's on purpose because Nuke does run faster in Linux, and the Foundry is aware of that. I think they have like benchmarks that show it. It's definitely getting faster on Windows, but yeah, the comp team having a dedicated comp team, we spend all of our time in Nuke, so it made sense to have that team in Linux, and we have some tools to convert paths and things like that, so it's really not that big of a deal. Our whole Nuke farm is now Linux, so that makes it a little nicer too.
Yeah, it was when I first started at Blur, I was like, how does this work? And the answer is actually surprisingly seamlessly. It's hardly ever an issue. Every once in a while, you'll have some path you copy that's Windows and whatever. But
yeah, thank you, pipeline team.
Thanks. Okay, next one from Henry. What has been the most helpful plugins for Nuke that you have used?
Well, definitely all the standards, PG bokeh, optical flares, all of the things that you would expect to have in that answer. Also, the one that I highlighted in the video, Mads Hagbart's point render thing was awesome, and well, it's not a plugin anymore, but Cryptomats, is another kind of just standard utilized. There's these certain things that you just kind of expect are always there, and then when you open a vanilla Nuke at home, you're like, oh geez, where did all this go? And then there was the other one of the lens kit nodes, and that's reading the camera data, doing all the defocus stuff like that we built internally. So I don't know, Nitant, if you have anything else?
Yeah, no, I think for third-party plugins, yeah, PG bokeh would probably be like up there. Yeah, I think that would be it. Yeah, I think there's a question about the read access cache. That's a tool that we created on the show. It's really Can you describe it in any more detail, Wes? I mean, it kind of just pulls from our cached out.
That tool relies on as much participation from the 3D side as it does from our side. Alembics there's point transforms, but the whole object itself also has its transform. The problem is when you export that and you're reading the transform data in an axis, you can't have parented transforms. So you can't have like multiple layers of parented transforms because you'll only get the transform animation from the final object. I believe I'm not fully caught up on what they're doing on the 3D side to make this work exactly, because it's all kind of hidden in the pipeline by now. But I think you have to bake down all the transforms into a single thing, and then that gets written out as an Alembic locator. Normally, it's not a null. There's some like nulls aren't recognized. There's a lot of like slightly a lot of things that will slightly trip it up. So we spent 2 or 3 days just trying every possible combination and figured out which one worked, and then just like, okay, this is the way that you do it. But I think it's just a cube with transform on it. Our tool will read it in. Now 3D Max is Y up. No, it is Z up instead of Y up. So it does the flip for us, and then it'll uncheck the read from file, which bakes in those keyframes into the axis node. So like I said, it's as important, even more important, to write the Alembic correctly as it is to read it in. And it's just it's just an axis node read from file, and then there's normally a drop down for which node you're pulling the Alembic node, not Nuke node, which node you're pulling the transform data from.
Yeah, Tyler Fox, our TD on the animation side, hooked us up with that one. Convert the caches into something that gives us that actual data. Because yeah, like Wes said, like if you just export like the geo, you don't actually get the transforms that you need for rotation scale and all the stuff that we utilize really here.
How do you usually receive the AOVs? One EXR containing all the passes, or passes from different departments?
I can do this one. It's usually one EXR that contains all the AOVs, and We usually have light selects broken out into those as well. So if it's a render of the robot, let's say, then you would get the key, the rim, and the fill named more specifically than that. But you get all those as well as your material AOVs, so you can make corrections to the specularity and reflection and things like that. That's typically what we get from the scene assembly department for effects. We tend to get, depending on whether or not it comes from Mantra or if it comes from scene assembly through Max. If it comes through Max, if the volume that we get comes from V-Ray, then we get those exact same light selects, so that we can have everything be at parity with each other. But otherwise, yeah, it will usually just be just kind of like the standard Mantra render layers.
Do you have any tips for getting into tool building and technical compositing?
That's Wes.
Yeah. I started by deconstructing. Well, it's always helpful to have a project or a goal in terms of like, I want to do this, how do I do this? And then you can at least have something to measure it against. Like every tool I build, isn't just me sitting and be like, I wonder what fun thing I can do. It's always like, 2 a.m. in the morning, the project's due at 7 a.m. the next morning, like, how do I do this? And then you just sit down and you just start writing it. So, I'll deconstruct existing tools, open them up, just go in, dive in, check them out. But I mean, all the Python I learned is kind of from that. It's just from looking at other stuff and looking up what I needed at the time on like Stack Overflow to do it. It wasn't like I took a formal Python class. At least for me, I find that I learn a lot better when I can immediately turn around and apply it. And then, 6 months later, I learned something of like, oh, that's way easier than what I already did. I can go back and reapply this. And then also, I'm not just saying this because I'm on the call with them, but the docs for Nuke are actually very straightforward, very to the point, and have a lot of useful information in there. So including the Blink. I mean, some of the tools you wrote are Blink, and a lot of those tools are just straight up me looking at the documentation of the sample code and being like, okay, if I just change these 3 things, I think this will work, and it works. And so I highly recommend diving into that and just taking a cursory look if you want to get an overview of what's possible.
That's why we call him Dr. Wes.
Thank you so much. And I think that's all we have time for, but thank you so much, both of you. That was really cool to see what Blur have been up to, and such a great project to have been involved with, and really looking forward to Volume 3.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.
See you next time.
Thank you, Wes.
Bye.
Thank you, Nitant.